Hello, GW political junkies, and welcome to this week's episode of Colonial Crossfire. I'm Michael Schnell. 38 days after major news organizations projected Joe Biden and Kamala Harris to win the 2020 presidential race, the Electoral College met on Monday to certify the election results. The electors officially declared Biden and Harris president-elect and vice president-elect with a final 306 to 232 vote count. This assertion comes on the heels of 6 weeks of claims of election fraud by Team Trump. The campaign launched legal challenges in a number of states with hopes of overturning the results. Most of these challenges have been fruitless. According to the Washington Times count, the president has lost 59 out of 60 cases, all but clearing a path for Biden and Harris to assume office on January 20th. But not so fast, because before we hit Inauguration Day, there's still a massive story to cover, one that will define the political atmosphere in Washington for the years to come. On January 5th, Georgians will again head to the polls to cast their votes in 2 Senate runoff races, which will determine who controls the Senate for the next 2 years. And let's not forget about COVID relief. As we enter into the third wave of the pandemic, Americans are struggling and many families and businesses desperately need support. So where's Congress? Clearly, there's a lot to cover today, and lucky for us, we have 2 of GW's finest future politicians to help us sort through all the madness. Joining us on the left, Vecchione, a junior broadcasting from Merrick, New York, Long Island strong, majoring in political science. Kara is a member of the GW College Democrats, March for Our Lives GW, and Sunrise GW. And on the right, Patrick Burland, a junior broadcasting from Woodbridge, Connecticut, majoring in political science. Patrick is the Director of Public Relations for the GW College Republicans. Thank you both for joining us. The first topic I want to get to is President Trump's legacy. In just 30 days, Joe Biden and Kamala Harris will be sworn into office, closing the book on Donald Trump's presidency. He has been one of the most polarizing and controversial figures this nation has seen. And that's precisely because these past 4 years have been filled with ups and downs, depending on who you ask. But there's one thing that all sides can agree on. The history books will be packed. So all that said, let's start off with a look back at these 4 years. Patrick, what do you think President Trump's legacy will be, and how will history books remember our 45th president?
I think that President Trump will probably be remembered for a number of reasons. I obviously think that the political realignment that we've seen that he's driven within the Republican Party will be something that historians will look at. His successes in confirming conservative judges to the courts, his conservation legislation, which has been historic in its size and scale, his contributions to renegotiating international trade agreements and negotiating new peace deals and normalizing relations between Israel and other countries in the Middle East. I think these are some of the big milestone achievements that he's helped broker during his presidency.
Kara, how will the history books remember our 45th president?
Well, I think with recent events given, I think he's probably going to be remembered for his handling, or rather his mishandling of the coronavirus. I mean, I feel like 2020 is definitely going to be a defining year for his presidency. Because, I mean, I know so much has been going on this year, but literally at the very beginning of the year, he assassinated a world leader, like a member of Iran's government, and almost got us into a war with Iran. And I feel like that was a pretty big example. I feel like that's a foreign policy failure. I feel like that is sort of a violation of Iran's sovereignty and an incredibly irresponsible thing to do, to just assassinate an official member of another state's government. Like, that would be if somebody assassinated the Secretary of Labor in the United States. A foreign agent did that. I think with the coronavirus, it's just been, the death toll in the United States should not be nearly as high as it is right now. I mean, I don't think anybody expected us to be able to handle the virus as well as New Zealand did, because quite frankly, we just don't have the social welfare systems in place to be able to maintain a lockdown that strict. But there was little to no proper coronavirus relief to actually get people through these lockdowns. And I think that's why you saw a lot of protests against the lockdowns, because people could not afford to actually stay home. And then you have the mixed messaging from the president, where he was talking about how it was less, like, just as deadly as the flu. And he really waffled on like mask wearing for a while. And I think if we didn't have this divide between masks, I think a lot of lives would be saved, because public health experts say that it's very effective in blocking it. And I don't think that a lockdown would have worked for us, because the focus was always on reopening the economy. So if that was always going to be the focus, and I think that's just generally how American government operates, there's too much focus on like reopening the economy, and we didn't have the social security net to be able to support people staying home.
Patrick,
Sorry.
Patrick, do you care to respond here?
Yeah, no, there's something I do agree. I think that it's absolutely unconscionable, the situation with regards to COVID relief. I mean, you cannot ask people to, shutter their businesses if you're not going to pay them to do that. And I think it's very unfortunate that leaders in Washington, like Speaker Nancy Pelosi, decided that politics and winning an election was more important than delivering COVID relief. She said the quiet part out loud a week or two ago when she said, now that we have a new president, we can renegotiate the terms of the COVID-19 relief bills. Andrew Cuomo said it was unfortunate that we were, getting the vaccine during the tenure of President Trump. I think the political maneuvering by leaders in Washington on both sides has been unconscionable. And I agree with Kara that, the COVID-19 relief was, not done well in this country. And I think there's plenty of blame to go around. I don't think it can be laying, fairly at the feet of the president. Nancy Pelosi said the quiet part out loud.
So I want to cut you off right there, because we are going to get to COVID relief later on in the show. But Kara, I'll give you one more chance to respond to Patrick, and then we'll move on to the next topic. Just some things he said, brought up Andrew Cuomo, not thinking that all the blame should be on President Trump. What are your responses there?
I absolutely agree. I mean, I think that a lot of blame should be placed on President Trump just because of his messaging and because he really, really went against what health experts said, but the Democrats didn't handle it well either. And I know this is coming up eventually, but that's sort of part of my concern going into Biden's administration as to whether the Democrats are really going to actually start promoting the welfare of the American people, because I think it's just a general issue that neither party was prepared to offer the sort of social relief that Americans truly needed during this pandemic.
So I want to move on to another really important, topic to discuss in terms of President Trump's legacy, and that has to do with President Trump and his part in the Republican Party. So just yesterday, the Republican dam finally broke on the Senate floor. For the first time since the election, Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell, a loyal Trump ally, recognized Biden's victory, referring to him as president-elect. But as more Republican lawmakers recognize Biden as the next commander-in-chief, President Trump is still the top figure in the Republican Party. His approval rating among Republicans is at 90%, and he's already raising ridiculous amounts of money for his future political endeavors. So the question I want to ask here, and Patrick, I'll throw it to you first, since that's to do with your party, what does this mean for the future of the Republican Party? Is Trumpism here to stay? And will the president remain the top figure in the party? Because right now, he's the face of it.
Yeah, no, the president is at the top of the party in terms of the approval polls. And I think that goes to show you that voters in the GOP do not want us to go back to a, corporate or patrician-centric party that, ignores what working class voters want. I feel like, Trumpism is often defined in terms of, his sort of rhetoric or, sort of the fiery things that he says or the fights he picks. But in reality, what it is, it's a departure from the idea that our trade deals, our domestic policy, and our international policy, Trumpism is the idea that those should be in service to everyday working families instead of, corporations and elites.
So you think that in terms of President Trump's, what they call populism, you think that will stay, but that's not such a bad byproduct to take from the past 4 years?
Absolutely. I think you can get someone who, is able to, work in a bipartisan manner, both in terms of policy and rhetoric. Obviously, President Trump, isn't always, in terms of the most diplomatic people in Washington. But the idea that our policy should be, more centered on the issues facing working families, I think that's a positive part of populism. And there's good and positive populism, and I think it's been unfairly maligned, by leaders in the Republican and the Democratic parties in the past. And I'm glad that he's opened a new chapter for the GOP.
Kara, take a look across the aisle at the other side, the other party. What do you think President Trump's reach on the Republican Party means for the future, and your thoughts on, Trumpism, whether it be the populist aspect of it or it be the president's rhetoric, which has taken up a lot in some flyover states across the country and other places. What do you think about the future of the Republican Party and how President Trump will take a play in that?
Yeah, I'd like to address some of what Patrick said, because I think it's very interesting to have populism and to sort of say that you're going to do what the working people want, but then when you're in office, not really do anything that helps the working people. I mean, if you look at all Trump's tax plans, they really just benefited like the wealthiest people in America. I can't really think of anything that Trump has necessarily done that actually tried to help the working people in America. I mean, he tried to get rid of the Affordable Care Act, and he couldn't really come up with anything new to replace it with. Like, I'm all in favor of getting a healthcare reform in America. I think that's something that we certainly need to happen, but like Trump wasn't jumping on, oh, everybody should be should have insurance or even a public option. I think he had the interesting, I think somebody called him a blue collar billionaire, which is interesting because he's pretending and he's sort of masquerading as this man of like the working people when really he's just still helping out like the top 1%, and he's really just still helping out the wealthiest people. And I think ultimately that's something that's an issue with both parties in America. And I do think I generally see that more of the Republican Party. And I don't think we can like forget the sort of racism that's, I feel like, inherently involved in the idea of Trumpism. I mean, he did start his campaign in 2016 by like stoking racial fears about migrants south of the border. And I don't know, I just think it's a very different type of populism than the populism of Bernie Sanders, where Bernie Sanders, I feel like, oh yeah, you can.
No, I want to jump in here because you bring up a good point. You brought up a good point. But I want to actually pose a question back to Patrick. We talk about populism and sort of Trumpism bringing in new voters who were never really interested in the political sphere, which we saw a lot of. We saw a lot of industrial workers start to go for President Trump. So in terms of that, bringing in a whole new block of voters and individuals and constituents into the party, what kind of lasting legacy do you think that will have on the Republican Party? And do you think that those voters are going to stick with the Republican Party, or they're going to stick with President Trump, meaning that when he's out of office, they may not continue to support the party as strongly as they did right now?
I think it's a little early to tell whether or not they will stick with the party. I will say, though, that Trump's populism, I was more speaking in the previous question, more to like, how he's reframed everything in terms of his actual policies, conservation, him being the first president to not start a war, and, decades. These are things that actually were on the minds of working class people. But he's also been a president and a leader of the party who has broadened the Republican Party to, young people of color. In the Rio Grande Valley and in Miami-Dade County, Republicans saw a large increase in vote from, people in the Latino community. And we saw, marginal upticks in the African-American community voting for the Republican Party. So I think he's actually, through, reaching out to more people of all backgrounds, I think he's broadened the Republican coalition in a lot of ways.
Kara, I'll give you a quick last word on this question, then I want to move on.
Yeah, so I do find it interesting because I did also notice those sort of demographic changes in the 2020 election. However, I think something that's important to consider is about whether it's actually Trump doing those things or whether it's the marketing against the idea of the Democrats being socialist. Like, I know in Florida, I believe like there was a lot of Cubans who voted for President Trump because they're very, very apprehensive about anything that has to do with socialism. And I think it could have been more of, this idea that the Democrats are socialist and they're going to be un-American and they're going to confiscate your car or something. And it was, I think, also a failure of the Democrats to properly combat that. Like, I think Trump has like a lot of sound bites. He's very good at using media to get his message across. And the Democrats weren't really able to do that. They weren't really able to combat against that messaging. So I think it would be interesting to see if the Democrats have been able to sort of promote like a digital counter defense against those arguments if things would have been different.
All right.
Agree. Oh, sorry.
No, quick, Patrick, I'll give you one more word.
Yeah, I'll just jump in. I agree. It was in part a failure on the Democrats to actually focus on reaching out to those communities. I think that's part of it. And absolutely, socialism was a factor. You had a lot of Democrats speaking, very favorably about collectivist and Bolshevik policies, and that probably had something to do with the collapse, in their often high voter turnout rates amongst those communities for them.
I want to move on to our next topic and dive in to what's to come in 2021. We just looked back at President Trump's legacy. Now let's look at the incoming Biden-Harris administration. So after the pomp and circumstance of Inauguration Day is over on January 20th, the new administration has a laundry list of issues to address. The president-elect is taking on the reins of a country engulfed in an economic recession, bruised from months of racial tensions, and sick from a pandemic that is taking the lives of way too many Americans every single day. There's a ton of work waiting for Biden and Harris at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. Kara, we'll go to you first. What do you think the Biden-Harris administration's first priority should be within those all-important first 100 days?
I think absolutely we should get like a national mask mandate and sort of uniformed ideas of how to deal with COVID. Because I think an issue that we had very early on in the pandemic when we had like our lockdowns, which our lockdowns were not nearly as severe as any other countries, but you had it done by state. And so all of these states would open up early before even like the modest like public health regulations were met that they had to meet in order to emerge from that lockdown. And I think that's why you saw all these cases, because we didn't really take it seriously and we weren't able to have a full lockdown. So I think we really need some consistent messaging from like the federal leadership to be like, this is what we need to do. This is what you need to do. And I think that there shouldn't be places where people are just allowed to walk into like a public store without masks. Like I'm an essential worker. I work at Chipotle. Yeah, we're considered essential, I guess. But like it makes me extremely uncomfortable, like the idea, and I live in New York, so we do have an enforced mask mandate. It's unfair to people who have to go to work to be exposed to this virus because people essentially don't want to wear like a piece of cloth over their face.
So I want to push you a little bit on this topic because President-elect Biden has said that he will impose a mask mandate for the first 100 days of his administration. But what I want to ask is, how effective will that be? And I'm not talking about the effectiveness of masks. I'm talking about the effectiveness of constituents and the American people and society being receptive to that mandate. The fact of the matter is a lot of Americans in this country refuse to wear masks. So, Biden can say all he wants, mask mandate for the first 100 days, but how effective do you really think that will be if we have such divide over masks in the country? So, kind of sort of like words mean something, but how will that translate into action?
I mean, I think ultimately, hopefully it will just be more influential. I think the best place where this can be carried out is private businesses, because those are places that are indoors. That's where people are basically being like forced to work and forced to possibly come into contact with other people who have had contact with the coronavirus, where people might not be wearing masks. And ultimately, I think we need to find some way to encourage those businesses to turn away people who don't wear masks, because I think that's where the most risk is. And ultimately, if somebody's not wearing a mask outside, you can just go 6 feet away from that other person. If somebody walks into a private business, like a Starbucks or something, and they're not wearing a mask, there's more of a chance they're going to infect someone.
I'm going to hop in here. I want to give Patrick a chance to respond to this question. Patrick, Biden-Harris step into the White House January 20th. What should the first priority be?
Well, it should be COVID-19 relief. I think that a mask mandate, is that is a way to go about stopping the spread of the virus. I would, in addition to sort of the policy aspect of it, I think, Americans value independence and individualism. I think a way to go about encouraging people to, mask up when they're interacting with others is just emphasize, like compassion, say, you're doing it out of a courtesy to keep, other people safe. You might not have it, but if everyone does it, those who are infected and asymptomatic, that helps reduce it. I'm not a physician, but I do think, and in my personal experience, playing it off as, rather than an imposition by the government, treating it as something that, something we can all do to help each other get through this. I think that's a simple way. I think these onerous, fines that they impose, they're great deterrents and all, but I don't think they actually do much in regards to getting people on board with it. I honestly think that COVID-19 relief, though, should absolutely be the first priority of the next administration.
And again, we're going to get to COVID-19 relief in a little bit, I promise, but I'm glad we keep bringing it up. The next question I want to bring up about the Biden-Harris administration is about Joe Biden and his interactions on Capitol Hill and with Congress. So in the 36 years that Joe Biden was Delaware senator, he may have been in the same Capitol building as today, but the atmospheres, they could not be more different. During Biden's senatorial tenure, compromises between Democrats and Republicans were the norm. But unfortunately, we now live in a highly polarized Washington where compromise and deal making is no longer the standard. So my question is how will Biden, the moderate deal maker, fare in this political climate, especially with different factions of the Democratic Party, as well as Republican ideals at his toes, lobbying him in every direction? How will he be able to facilitate bipartisanship deals on Capitol Hill at this very critical moment? Kara, we'll throw this one to you first.
I mean, I think ultimately, and what I think, I have a lot of concerns actually with Biden's incoming administration, just based on how he ran his campaign. I feel like he's still sort of in that mindset that this is like the 1970s or whatever, and there's really like all the parties are like full of like moderates. I mean, if you really look at it right at this moment, the most liberal Republican is still far more conservative than the most conservative Democrat. And I mean, obviously polarization's been a problem, and it's been a problem since the 80s. But I don't know how well Biden's going to adjust to that. I noticed throughout a lot of his campaign, he seemed to be appealing to the idea of like moderate Republicans instead, or never Trump Republicans, instead of perhaps the same people who Bernie Sanders was appealing to, which is people who don't really vote and aren't really politically active, but would vote if they had sort of policies that could potentially help them. And I think that if he keeps sort of doing this, he's not going to be like during and like sort of overly compromising with Republicans in Congress who are far more to the right than they previously were, I believe, when he was actually in Congress. I don't think he's going to do well if he does run for re-election, because I don't think he's going to get past the stuff that people who voted him in office want him to accomplish.
So I want to push you a little bit on that, because I think that's a very interesting point. And I mentioned a little bit in the question, but Biden has to deal with the progressive wing of the Democratic Party, the moderate wing of the Democratic Party, and then cater a bit to the Republicans in terms of his bipartisan nature. So do you think that he will have a difficult time doing this? And how do you think that it'll affect his standing with these different factions within Congress? Because we already see it right now, and it's something I'm going to get to in a little bit, in terms of all these different groups lobbying Biden about his cabinet picks. So when it comes to deal making on Capitol Hill, how do you think that all these different voices will be affecting his ability to sort of penetrate through the political partisanship and make bipartisan deals?
I mean, I think ultimately the progressives are going to get the short end of the stick with this one. And I say that as a progressive, just noticing sort of his cabinet picks. I mean, I haven't noticed anybody who I consider like absolutely terrible, but it looks like he's shaping up to be, it looks a lot like the Obama administration. I think he has some like alumni from the Obama administration. I think Tony Blinken did some work with the Obama administration. And I know the most controversial pick that he's been, that didn't end up happening, thankfully, but there was a lot of consideration that I believe he was going to pick Rahm Emanuel, who was like the former mayor of Chicago, who covered up a police murder, into the Secretary of Transportation, which would have been a terrible, terrible move, considering that there have been Black Lives Matter protests going on since June addressing police brutality.
I want to get Patrick in here quickly. Patrick, do you think that Biden's experience in the Senate will be able to penetrate this really stark polarization and partisanship within Congress?
I do. In some regards, that's heartening. In others, it's concerning. I'm actually a little scared of something that, Biden and some hawkish Republicans might agree on, which is that we need to, be more involved in occupying foreign countries. I'm a little bit concerned about the, return of corporatism as a dominant, governing ideology. On some things, though, I think there can be coalitions of progressives and conservatives in the Senate and in the House that advance bills that actually, deliver relief to people, that actually write, foreign policy that is helpful. Some of his cabinet picks I don't think are terribly controversial. His actual transportation secretary, Pete Buttigieg, seems a little bit inexperienced and more of a political choice than a practical one. Neera Tanden obviously has some, concerning personal history about how she's behaved in the workplace. I believe she punched Fayez Shaker, Bernie Sanders' campaign manager. So there's some controversial picks in there. I do think that Biden's experience as a deal maker and his bipartisan, history will help him. Obviously, there will be some road bumps, but overall, I think he'll probably, have some success reaching across to Republicans.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I just wanted to sort of go off of some of what Patrick said. I actually forgot Neera Tanden was being considered, and yeah, that's not good either. That's certainly a slap in the face to progressives, and I know that a lot of us, like me, who voted for Biden, and a lot of people who sort of like progressives, who sort of bit the bullet and were like, okay, we need to do this and hopefully he'll pass some sort of reforms. They're like, really, we support you, and then you do this. Also about Pete Buttigieg, yeah, I guess he got his little I backed out of the primary, I was winning to support you prize. They had to give that to him. And yeah, I wanted to agree with you about foreign policy, because I do think foreign policy, and this is unfortunate because I disagree with almost everything about the United States foreign policy, is one of the things that's like very, very bipartisan. And that I don't think you really see a lot of divergence in foreign policy, except for like some of the newer Congress people, like Congresswoman Omar, Congresswoman Tlaib. You don't really see a lot of divergence. So I think for better or probably for worse, we are going to see some sort of concurrence on foreign policy.
I want to move on to another question now involving, again, the Biden-Harris transition. Their administration has been the target of a lot of lobbying efforts trying to make their cabinet as diverse as possible. As Biden said, he wants to make it look like America. So the question I have is, do you think he's doing enough to make his cabinet look like America? Has he been able to balance all the pressure from these minority groups to be represented in his administration well? How has he done overall, and what work needs to be done? What other minority groups need more more exposure and representation within the cabinet? Carrots, your party will go to you first.
I mean, I think on a surface level, I think he's done an all right job. It's not exclusively like white men. However, I think that there's sort of something important to talk about when it comes to like tokenization in some of these picks, where a lot of, and I'm not necessarily saying any of this for like people who Biden has put forward, but I think it's something to look out for, where people who may be of like a certain group will actually has sort of like a history of doing things that go against that group, like and will not support sort of the progressive policies that may be endorsed by a lot of people in that group, or that maybe if they were enacted would help a lot of people in that group. So I think what myself and what a lot of other progressives would really like to see is not just people who look different, but people who sort of acknowledge the different struggles that different groups face, and come with solutions to really actually help those groups out. And the solutions that may be against the grain or may not be like endorsed by the Democratic Party leadership, like progressive solutions. I know that I think one pick that I really support and that Sunrise is pushing for is Deb Haaland as Secretary of the Interior. She's a Native American. And I think that sort of comes with a unique perspective about that job, which is a lot about, you know, conserving like the U.S. interior and the environment of the U.S. And I think that's an example of a diverse pick that isn't just tokenization.
I want to push you a little bit on something you said, because I think it's really interesting. You mentioned that you think that some picks in terms of progressivism may be good to go against, you know, Democratic leadership, even if Democratic leadership doesn't necessarily agree with that pick or agree with that pick's views, still think about having them in the administration. Do you actually think that's a smart move? Because especially when we're in such a polarized environment right now, do you think that it would be more important to have, you know, those select individuals that may not please the entire party, as opposed to having a connected and togetherness in the Republican Party to take on the Republicans in Congress and in Washington, or just in other legislative goals?
I think if the Democrats want to win, they need to stop trying to like have this sort of club where they just do whatever the party leadership wants and actually think about what's going to help the American people. Like, I think if we think about it, Biden was one of the weaker candidates coming out of the Democratic primary. The only reason he won the Democratic primary, if we're being totally honest, is because Obama made a few phone calls. And I think the election sort of fell into his lap with the coronavirus pandemic because Trump just handled that so poorly. A lot of Americans were like, I'm not even enthusiastic about Biden, but he's got to be better than this guy. And so I think I think ultimately that's a good thing. I think Biden is going to handle the coronavirus better than Trump. But if what we get is just 4 more years of Obama, I feel like that's going to bring around either Trump running for election in 2024 or Trump 2.0, because ultimately the Democrat leadership doesn't really do that much, I feel, to actually help the American people. They don't differentiate themselves from the Republicans enough in a way that people who aren't actively following politics will grasp, because they don't really give a lot of material, particularly social welfare support. I mean, obviously there's a lot of things in which they differ, like the social issues, gun reform issues. I think the Democrats are a lot better on. But unless the Democrats start actually really improving the lives of these sort of working class people who maybe supported Bernie Sanders or maybe were supporting Trump, I don't think that there's going to be much of a future for the party in the coming years.
I think that's a really interesting point that you're making and a really interesting perspective. And I think that we're actually seeing it play out in real life. I mean, we saw challengers to Nancy Pelosi's speakership, more progressive challengers. We're seeing the number of progressive representatives and senators in Congress. So I think that's a really interesting point you bring up. But I want to bring Patrick into this conversation. Patrick, I'll throw the original question back to you. How is the Biden-Harris administration doing in making a diverse cabinet, and where can they do better?
I have to agree with Kara. I think Deb
We
Haaland,
have all the bipartisanship over here.
exactly. Well, so as she said, though, Deb Haaland is an example of someone who, has practical experience. She was a member of Congress. She comes from a Native American background, brings a unique perspective to the role. That contrasts with people like Javier Becerra, who would be the Secretary of Health and Human Services, even though he was Attorney General, doesn't really have a lot of experience, or Pete Buttigieg, who is the mayor of a town smaller than Fargo, North Dakota, to be Secretary of Transportation. I think that, if Joe Biden wants to make the cabinet look like America, he absolutely should do that, but it shouldn't be at the cost of finding competent and practical and experienced leaders who can actually make a, positive change in the lives of everyday working families.
Very interesting points on this question. I want to now move on from our deep dive sections into rapid fire section and get some quick answers to some quick questions. First up, we'll get to Georgia. Like I mentioned at the top of the show, all eyes are on the Peach State as Georgians will determine the Senate majority in a very polarized Washington for the next 2 years. For one seat, we have former journalist Jon Ossoff taking on incumbent David Perdue. And on the other side, we have Pastor Raphael Warnock, who's challenging incumbent Republican Kelly Loeffler. It's been a fierce race with a lot of fundraising and campaigning throughout the state and across the nation. First off, I want to ask both of you, what are your predictions for the outcomes of these races? And then with that, for the makeup of the Senate, if we're going to see a 52-48, or if we're going to see a 50-50. And then I want to ask, what influence do you think that President Trump and President-elect Biden's campaigning has been having in the state? Because there's been a lot of conversation about President Trump campaigning in the state, especially when he's been in a Twitter feud with the state's attorney general, with the state's secretary of state and governor. So, Patrick, I want to throw this to you first. What are your predictions for the 2 Senate runoffs, and how do you think that our 2 political A-listers are doing in terms of campaigning in the state?
I'm feeling good about the Republican chances of holding both Senate seats. GW College Republicans has been phone banking for Kelly Loeffler and David Perdue. I think the most likely outcome is they win. I do think that when you look at the presidential election in Georgia, it looks like Joe Biden outperformed Warnock and Ossoff. I think that's because there's a lot of Georgians who might think that, maybe they were tired of Trump, but they do want to check on Joe Biden's administration. I think Congresswoman Ocasio-Cortez's comments that, if Democrats flip both seats, then there won't have to be any sort of bipartisan negotiations. I think that definitely scares a lot of Georgians and gives them incentive to vote for Senator Perdue and Senator Loeffler, so that we have a check on the Biden administration, so that Biden does have to work in a congenial manner with both parties.
Also, have no fear, there'll still be plenty of gridlock in Washington, considering the 60 vote threshold in the Senate needed for a lot of pieces of legislation. But anywho, interesting insights. Kara, I'll throw the same question to you. What are your predictions for these two races, and what effect do you think that the president and Joe Biden's campaigning is having in the state?
I mean, I'd love to say that we get both, but I think more likely we're going to see my most optimistic scenario is that Warnock wins, because I think that Kelly Loeffler has a lot of issues with, I think she engaged in insider trading with and was lying about like the severity about the coronavirus when she knew about the severity of the coronavirus, and made some economic choices based on that. I think that's really going to like hurt her credibility, and the fact that she has her marketing based on, oh, I'm a woman of the people, and she lives in like a mansion and owns a basketball team. Ultimately, I don't know what effect the Trump rally is going to have. I know Biden is planning to have a rally in Georgia. And I think to explain sort of, and Patrick brought this up, like the people who voted for Biden more than they voted for Warnock and Ossoff, I feel like that could be more of a lot of people will just vote for the president and they won't vote down ballot. Then some people voted Biden and then voted Republican down ballot. So it remains to be seen how, honestly, I think that my focus is on if Stacey Abrams and I think a lot of the other organizers on the ground in Georgia who really, really pushed to turn the state blue, I think it's going to be them more than perhaps Biden who is going to drive turnout. I do think Trump is going to be the one to drive turnout for the Republican Party, though.
So that's an interesting thought. And I want to pose this question to both of you. I'll go to Patrick with it first, because I want to push him a little bit on this part. The president has been making claims of election fraud in the state, that the ballots weren't counted and the ballots were counted incorrectly, especially in Georgia, trying to overturn the results in Georgia. So when I talk about what effect that the president's campaigning is having in the state, what I mean is he's trying to tell voters that the voting wasn't fair and wasn't legal in November. But he's going to need those same voters to head to the polls in January and to bring that electorate to the voting booth to vote to vote on these two very crucial Senate runoff races. So Patrick, I want to push you a little bit on this. What effect, that being said, and him taking on the leadership in Georgia, what effect do you think that will have on turnout, and then effectively the Republican candidates' chances in January? Because it's a chief concern among a lot of establishment Republicans.
Yeah, I think this is an area where the president has gotten extremely bad advice from those in his circle. People like Rudy Giuliani, and some of these newer faces like Lynn Wood, who apparently is actually a huge fan of Stacey Abrams, encouraging people to not vote in the runoff. Is a very, very concerning thing, because it doesn't make a lot of sense. I understand that there's a lot of concerns that we need to secure the elections, because inevitably, as everyone concedes, that there is a small number of errors that are made, either human or mechanical. I think that the president had ample opportunity to have his campaign provide evidence of voter fraud, and it doesn't appear that they were able to do so. So obviously, I think that he should focus more on advocating for solutions. The Electoral College has cast their ballots. He should be focusing on how he can finish out his term strong and help re-elect Senator Perdue and Senator Loeffler. I think he should put an end to these grifters that are suggesting people don't vote, because I think it's important, no matter who you support or what candidate you support, you should never be encouraging people to not vote in an election. I just don't think that's productive or helpful.
This rhetoric has been going on for a while now. So do you think that it will have any effect on election day, or is it too early to tell?
Inevitably. I mean, runoff elections are notoriously lower turnout anyhow. I'm concerned about the lower turnout that, these sort of comments can make, but I'm confident that the president will tell every Republican in Georgia and all those independents who want a check on President-elect Biden that they should go out and vote for Senator Loeffler and Senator Perdue.
Kara, I want to push you on this also. What effect do you think that the president's campaigning is having on voting in Georgia?
I mean, let's be real. The people who support, like, Trump's main base is going to just do whatever he says. That's why I think in states like Pennsylvania, where it looked like if mail-in ballots were to be counted, the Democrats would get the lead. They were like, oh, stop the count. But then in Arizona, when it looked like Republicans might get the lead if they kept counting, they're like, oh, keep counting those ballots, though. Like, I think it really says something about the sheer sort of chaos that happened during Trump's administration, that we had a president who basically declared an entire election fraudulent with literally no proof. Like, he was just like, I lost, so it's not true. Or because of like the mail-in ballots, which, I mean, it's just utterly absurd. And I mean, I know that in the lead up to the election, I heard a lot of my classmates, because we'd be having discussions about this in some of my classes, were really concerned about like, oh, if this was going to turn into a coup. I think, you know what, if I'm being entirely frank, I think Trump was just too stupid about it to actually make it a real coup. Like, look at Rudy Giuliani and him bringing in those witnesses who were clearly intoxicated to try to claim voter fraud. I don't know. I think it's just really a wild, wild time in American history. But ultimately, I don't know what effect that's going to have.
I want to jump in here and get to our final topic of today's episode. It's the topic that we've all been teasing all night, and it's those COVID relief negotiations up on Capitol Hill. So Friday is the deadline to pass legislation to keep the government funded, and lawmakers are hoping to attach COVID relief to that effort in an omnibus bill. Speaker Pelosi is pulling for money to pay police and essential workers through funding for small governments, for state governments and local governments. But Majority Leader McConnell is refusing unless the bill includes measures to protect employers from COVID-19 related lawsuits. Time is clearly running out. Friday is just around the corner, and Americans are hurting, and something will have to give. So my question to the both of you is, how should Congress proceed, and what do you think the answer is? Kara, we'll throw to you first.
I mean, ideally, I'd like them to pass a comprehensive bill that does much more than probably what the current bill is going to do. But I do think there's certainly a real danger in protecting employers against COVID-19 related lawsuits, because, I mean, like, sure, there could be like certain small business owners who may be given a lawsuit unfairly, but then that just gives a lot of employers fair leave to mistreat their employees and subject them to and sort of expose them to the virus when they really don't need to be exposed to the virus, or not permit them adequate sick leave. Because I think that's something that's really important to do, to ensure that anybody who gets COVID-19 is able to stay home from work for the adequate quarantine time. So I don't know if they'll be able to push to get rid of that certain clause, but I think that's definitely sort of a dangerous thing to have on the bill. And I think that will do the exact opposite of COVID relief. I think that could result in essential workers still really hurting under this virus.
Patrick, how should Congress proceed? Because they've been on a standstill for this, quite frankly, since March, when the first HEROES Act was passed. And they've been going at this for months now, and time is down to the wire if they want to create this omnibus bill so they can have attached to the government funding by Friday. So how do you think Congress should proceed?
I think that Congress should absolutely try and split these things up, and as many, let everyone's bill get a vote. I think that Senator Hawley and Senator Sanders should have their coronavirus relief package get a vote. I think that the issue of corporate liability shielding is an important one. I think there's probably a middle ground. There shouldn't be any sort of insistence that, you can under no circumstances sue an employer. But obviously, for certain things, you should be able to sue if there's some sort of gross negligence or abuse by an employer. Sure, they should, the legislation should permit those types of lawsuits. Although obviously, I think that the government should be more than willing to step in and help support people that contract the virus at their place of employment, rather than placing the blame of a pandemic on small businesses. Really, the government should be supporting people in those circumstances. So I think that Congress giving as many pieces of legislation an up or down vote in both houses as quickly as possible is the best way of producing bipartisan and people-centric legislation, rather than legislation that's developed in these think tanks of the Senate Majority Leader and the Speaker's office, and then they shove something down the throats of all the members of Congress and backbenchers. I just think giving every member a proper vote would be best.
All right, and we will have to end today's debate there. Patrick Burland, Cara Vecchione, thank you both so much for joining us today. Really great conversation. A lot of bipartisanship between you two, which is nice to see. So thank you both for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Our fact checkers have been busy behind the scenes monitoring today's debate. Be sure to check out the comment section on Facebook and the description section on YouTube for our debate fact check. And with that, we'll close out today's episode of Colonial Crossfire. Be sure to check us out online at www.gw-tv.com and follow us on Twitter and Instagram, and like us on Facebook. And if you have strong political beliefs and would like to voice them to the GW community, please reach out to the Crossfire team via email or social media. We'd love to have you on the show. But before we go, and on a bittersweet note, this is my last episode of Colonial Crossfire as I'm graduating this semester. But have no fear. The show will be in the very competent hands of three familiar Crossfire faces. I'm thrilled to share that Jessica Nix will be taking on the debate anchor reins next semester, and joining Jessica at the helm of the show are our two new executive producers, Kate Waters and Eva Grossman. Jessica, Kate, Eva, you three have contributed so much to the show these past few years, and I cannot wait to see all the amazing things you do with Crossfire. I'm really proud of this trio. Before I mention that this moment right now is bittersweet, and it is, because while I'm sad to close out my time with this show and this organization, I can't help but smile when looking back at all the memories that I've made at GWTV, especially with Crossfire. I joined GWTV the first month of my freshman year back in 2017, and I haven't looked back since. I've been part of Crossfire and G Week, and I made some debrief cameos over the years. I spent early mornings on the 5th floor studio, late nights in SMPA classrooms writing scripts, and a lot of laughs through it all. Without a question, GWTV has been the highlight of my past 3 years and of my past 3.5 years here at GW. I learned more than I could have ever imagined about journalism, TV news, and politics. GWTV helped me find my voice. Literally, as most people would say, I'm a pretty loud feature of the organization, but also figuratively. This organization and this show in particular have built my confidence, helped me recognize what I hope to achieve as a journalist, and it's helped me grow as a person. But even more than that, more valuable and meaningful to me are the friendships that GWTV has given me. I attended the first GWTV general body meeting freshman year, hoping to gain journalism skills and knowledge, which I have, but I never expected to gain such important friends along the way. The friendships I made at GWTV are ones that I will cherish and hold dearly, dearly in the years to come. We've made a lot of memories in our little community on the 5th floor of SMPA, and we've shared a ton of laughs. And for that, I'm extremely thankful. Now, I would be remiss if I did not extend enormous thank yous to a handful of folks who have been instrumental in my time at GWTV these last 3.5 years. First off, to all the former members of GWTV, there are too many of you to name. Thank you all for your contributions to this organization and for welcoming in this young freshman with open arms and teaching me so much about journalism and TV news that I still call upon today. An immense thank you to Doug Zimmerman, our AV extraordinaire. Most of the content that we put out would never make it to air without Doug's help. You put up with our crazy personalities and ideas day in and day out, and I think I speak for the entire organization when I say just how grateful we are for you. Thank you to eBoard. This semester threw a lot of challenges at us, and we persevered and grew as a station. I couldn't have asked for a better group of people to help steer the organization through a pandemic and expand our coverage from monthly to weekly episodes. I'll miss our Sunday evening talks, but I'm lucky to call all of you my dear friends. To my family and friends, and you all know who you are, thank you for putting up with my incessant GWTV and Crossfire talk. This organization and this show have been a big part of my life these past 3.5 years, and you've all supported me and helped me be the best journalist I can be. Dad, thank you for always talking through topics and questions with me. And Mom, thank you for always making sure I'm looking my best on camera. And to the entire Crossfire team, I'm only a small part in this big operation that we put on every week. This show would not be what it is without our talented and driven group of reporters, writers, editors, and producers. All of you are such impressive journalists, and I'm proud to call you all my friends. And finally, to my partners in crime, Crossfire's intrepid executive producers, Izzy Cassandra Newsome and Haley Oland. We've been with each other since the start, and there's no one else I would have rather worked with to put this program together every month. Thank you for the laughs, for the honest advice, for the great ideas, and for the friendships. We've accomplished a lot during our time at the helm of this show, things that I'm damn proud of. And it couldn't have been accomplished without you two. From the bottom of my heart, thank you both. And with that, for all of us here at GWTV, I'm Michael Schnell. Thanks for getting caught in the crossfire with us. Have a safe, healthy, and happy holidays and New Year. We'll see you right back here next time.